This is a spotlight on the Yokai Compendium. It's basically a monster book, 50 plus horrors to murder your players with, inspired by Japanese folklore. My buddy Nicholas sent me this, so I did not have to pay for it. This is a beta version, but I do believe it releases today. It may be out by the time you're watching this video. I'll put a link in the description for where you can download this on DM's Guild. The price will be $14.95. When we're talking about some content for $15, especially a monster book, we want to see and talk through whether there's enough here to warrant your purchase. Is there enough here that is unique enough, different enough, cool enough, beyond all of the monsters that we already have access to through Monster Manual, Volo's Guide, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, and then all of the fully prim and proper published third-party stuff like Tome of Beasts, Creature Codex, and such. This is inspired by Japanese folklore. I feel like too often in the D&D space, and maybe this is good or bad, I don't know, it's very European history-esque. It feels somewhat familiar, right? Kind of isolated and centralized around that continent and that area. And even when you get into mythology and creatures and monsters, yes, you have like mythic odysseys of Theros, but the common ones, the expected ones, are Greek mythology, Roman mythology, and Norse mythology, right? The orcs, they're very familiar. They feel very same-ish. And whether your perception of orcs comes from something from Tolkien, or it comes from Warhammer, or it comes from Blizzard's Warcraft, orcs, broad-shouldered, you hear the grunts, you hear the groans, you hear the war drums. When that monster comes around the corner, your PCs kind of know what to expect. Many designers, creators, especially in the 5th edition game space, have not delved into sub-Saharan Africa, Aztec and Mayan culture, maybe East Asian culture, as is the case here, and Japanese. So inherently, just based on the source material you're pulling from, we should be getting some new stuff here. And then when you work through and combine that with the horror element and sort of the unspeakable things from Japanese folklore, some of this stuff can be relatively hard to describe, and it's hard to just pinpoint and nail down, oh, okay, we're fighting a dragon. Oh, okay, we're fighting goblins or giants. And I like that because it adds and it ramps up the level of mystery and suspense within. And if they can take this Japanese folklore and the stories and the crunch that comes from some real world stuff and work their way through it, you might find some really interesting and unique 5th edition mechanics, like traits and abilities. And at the end of it all, you might find 50 entirely new monsters, which therefore makes it worthwhile for you to look into. But let's see what's here. That was kind of a long intro, but I want to kind of just give you the idea on why I decided to cover this more than just because it was sent to me. The idea that there's something new here is appealing to me. Okay, we're going to go over this disclaimer real quick. We went for the most accurate depiction in respect to the original Japanese lore, while also watering down the very graphic details to comply with the updated DM's Guild policies and make sure every reader will be able to enjoy it and immerse themselves in the beautiful and horrifying world of Japanese folklore. Still, viewer discretion is advised. Table of contents, a bunch of names, Japanese obviously, but what I love is there is a pronunciation and translation table. Tells you what the name of it is, tells you how you say it or what it is in Japanese, tells you how to pronounce it, and then it translates like what that means. So that's a really sweet touch. That's really good. Introduction. As per the creators, this is what they're offering. Let me set this up for you. Our world is shrouded by a veil that protects us from the wickedness of the unknown and the horrors of the incomprehensible. Devils and gods, demons and tricksters, the holy and the unholy, they are everywhere around us, unseen by mortals. But the veil grows thinner, and the nights grow darker. They walk among us and away from us. They inhabit mountains and islands, bridges and sewers. They are inside our houses and our temples, above us in the sky, and below us within the oceans. They are the yokai. And now that you have opened this book, the veil is lifted. Somewhere. And they are free to roam the world. What is a yokai? They are strange, mysterious apparitions, but in an extremely broad and more vague sense than the word suggests. They can be anything from animals with puzzling powers or creatures responsible for supernatural phenomena, to lingering ghosts and vengeful entities. However, they all have one thing in common. They are spirits that have taken form through the sins of humanity. They are neither malevolent nor benevolent. They have truths and regrets. They cause grief and relieve it at the same time. All in all, there is no one definition to describe them. They are what we need them to be, and also what we don't. What I like about that introduction is you will notice as we delve into the various ones that I'm going to cover, I'm not going to cover all 50, but as we get into them, you'll notice the artwork. They look a little strange. They look weird, as you would expect. I mean, we're dealing with sort of a side of the world from real life, right? A culture, the folklore from Japanese that is not typically seen in that sort of medieval European kind of take on things, right? We always have dwarves and elves, Tolkien did, right? We kind of know the dragons and the various monsters. So you're going to see some stuff that feels very unique and foreign to us. And combined with the artwork and the wonderful part about how each section gives us a description that we can read to our players if we don't want to just show them the artwork, it allows us to sort of create some storyline and some levels of interest and intrigue and suspense into exactly what they're fighting. What that also does gameplay-wise, it allows the DM to bring mystery to the table. The players don't know immediately how to handle these creatures. It's tough to discern up front what their weaknesses are, what this thing can do, because we don't even really know what we're looking at. So I love that element, and that's always going to be something that can form the foundation when you're pulling from real life folklore. The catch is, can they wrangle that into something that feels worthwhile playing actually at the table in a game? All right, let's see what's here. So we have the Abura Sumashi, a very rare yokai, but one with a very peculiar behavior. The Abura Sumashi looks like an old man wearing a straw coat from afar. But upon close inspection, its face resembles a wrinkled potato or a stone. Interesting artwork. I love just the aesthetic overall, where you have that sort of orb, that sort of abstract symbol behind it. A lot of the art here feels and screams very Miyazaki, which has a pleasant but also mysterious, interesting aesthetic to it. And I really like the take on that. And then the stat block itself, that we've gotten away from just the default of, yes, there's parchment, but within it kind of looks like it's on that sort of old world Japanese scroll work or something like this. So here we have a 1/8 CR guy. Okay, it's a medium fey neutral. Normal in armor class, as you would expect for 1/8, right? Not a lot to write home about. But notice, it has this ability. I mean, there's quite a few abilities there. Oftentimes, something that CR 1/8 is kind of a throwaway creature, because you can't have a lot of buttons and a lot of moving parts, because if you have too much going on, it's not really 1/8 anymore. So the interest here is in this ability that I see called Fear of the Weak-Spirited. The Abura Sumashi lets out a haunting laugh. Creatures within 60 feet of it that can hear it and have less than 16 charisma have disadvantage on all their attacks against it for the next 10 minutes. 10 minutes it's going to last the whole encounter. Encounters don't last 10 minutes. Additionally, the Abura Sumashi deals an extra 1d10 necrotic damage with its stick attack to all affected creatures. So notice, first off, remember, we are talking about 1/8. Those negative effects, if you are weak-spirited and you don't override this, they're devastating at low level, which is where you would use a creature like this against level 1s, right? You'd maybe even use multiple if you were to try and figure out the math of the CR system of a 1/8 creature. Other than a CR 0, this is as low as it gets. But that extra 1d10 necrotic damage is devastating to level 1s. And they have disadvantage against all attacks against it. Here's the most interesting part, though, and this is where we start dabbling into bringing in the lore and the folklore of what this thing is and how the creators decided to wrangle this in and figure out how to stat this. They're not just pulling from the DMG and saying, well, let's give something reckless, or let's give it some traits that already exist in the monster manual. You're not even making a saving throw. This just says if you have charisma as your dump stat, you're not playing warlocks, you're not playing bards, you're not playing paladins, you're playing tanky guys, but they're all fighters. If your charisma is less than 16, 15 or less, you're subject to this. And as it's not a saving throw, you don't get to save against it later on. You're just getting those effects. That's a lot going on for a CR 1/8. Now, it is beyond the scope of this video for me to talk through whether something is balanced or not. I'm just looking for unique, and is there enough here that feels different than what I'm already getting? Aesthetically, it definitely is different, and adherence to that lore and story, and the way they've manifested that through the stat block sounds pretty cool, okay? As we get through, I mean, we've got this cow guy. Again, I love the artwork, right? It's a really good contrast aesthetically as well to what was sort of in the disclaimer, where you may be dealing with some very dark, right? And Japanese folklore, I mean, if you've looked into any parts of it, there's a really heavy horror element there, right? That with the superstition attached to it, it's stuff that scares both young and old, right? You know, creatures and beings that eat children and whatnot. So things can get very dark. So I love the aesthetic that kind of contrasts against that and still makes it pleasurable to look at and read through. And then just the little touches of, you know, kind of this ghosted image here in the background, and just the aesthetic overall is really, really well done. This guy's a CR 1/4. It has a charge ability, as you would expect with a cow. But just reading through the lore, that's the epitome of content that provides seeds of inspiration. Something in the storyline that I might want to delve into and present that to my players in a unique and interesting way. And then mechanically, it manifests in a different way. It's a CR 1/4, yet it can touch a willing creature with its muzzle to cure the creature of one disease. It's a neutral good guy. You know, but I mean, that's just neat to have that sort of interaction from players with a CR 1/4. Otherwise, it's kind of like, let's rush through the early levels because all the cool stuff and the cool encounters happen later. If you're diseased, and remember, you're dealing with low-level content, so you don't have paladins that can fix this stuff. You don't have the resources. Let's go meet up with these cows. Because once per day, it can cure disease by simply touching it with its muzzle. Where does that come from? They're the spirits of cows that helped build temples. Upon completion, they refused to leave the temple grounds, resulting in their bodies being turned into stone and becoming permanent fixtures there. They're non-aggressive yokai that are considered among the greatest signs of luck. They still retain their bovine characteristics and behavior with the exception of their skin, it being red with black and white marks. Most of this stuff, if not all of it, I'm sure you can probably Google and Wikipedia, and you'll find some lore and history on that. So the fact that they were known as the greatest signs of luck, protecting creatures from disease, and that's manifested as a once-per-day ability, it's really neat the way they're kind of wrangling through this stuff. It feels different than what I'm looking at in the CR 1/4 section in the monster manual. Look at this thing. This thing's neutral. Attracted to filth, CR 3. Does not attack creatures that are clean, for example, with prestidigitation, unless it has no other choice. Additionally, if a creature has less than half its maximum hit points within 30 feet of it, and the Akanami can see it, the creature is vulnerable to so he's going to take double damage from this guy's attacks. They are filthy yokai that live in the dirtiest of places and feed on slime and waste. The way they've moved that into, if you are clean through like prestidigitation, how often do you have like a player that is obsessed with being clean? Prestidigitation and mending, and like they're always just prim and proper and in tip-top shape at all times. But how often that's a social thing, an exploration thing. How often does a monster give a damn about that? Here, clearly it does. That's pretty neat, and we're getting some interesting stuff here, okay? Obviously, I can't go through all of these, but as we start to scroll through, I mean, look at this artwork, right? And these run the range from, I mean, we've looked at some CR 1/8, 1/4. This is CR 26. So clearly there's high-level bosses, layer actions. How do you interact with this thing as a boss fight? What can it do? And so on. And for a boss, right, something really powerful, CR 26, I mean, this is an 18th level spellcaster. Finger of Death and Power Word Stun, Power Word Kill. Oftentimes, these are things where it's like, we need to like get enough NPCs and make sure we have enough magic items to kill this thing. Look at this interesting ability, Weakness to Dolls. I don't know how to pronounce it. There's a pronunciation chart, like I said. The Hashihime will not attack a creature that carries a doll that resembles itself. It will attack the doll instead. How much flavor and inspiration is there for the DM to latch onto that they can use to allow players to sort of take advantage of that, which changes the entire dynamics of this encounter? But who's the NPC that makes these dolls? Where do they go to get this? How do they even know to get such a thing? Now notice how you're incorporating the lore bard and those that are fascinated with studying these creatures and this culture and this lore. That's of extreme value if you can give your tanks these dolls, because they can run amok. While they have the doll, they're not going to get attacked by this thing. That's a brilliant take on stuff like this, and I'm sure reading through all of this, it starts to make sense. Okay? So as we scroll through, I mean, there's just a ton here. The visuals are very different. I mean, this is a wagon wheel guy that changes the way that it maneuvers through the battlefield. It has something called rolling death and spin in place. So now you don't just have the typical, you find an abandoned wagon that's overturned and broken on the side of the road. Okay, well, let's look out for boulders. Is there a giant or ogres over the hill, right? Now here, as sort of a mimic would attack the chest that attacks the PCs, all of a sudden a face is seen within the flaming wheels. They light on fire, and now you have a very interesting encounter. So there's just a ton here. It's laid out well. The artwork is beautiful. It screams to me Miyazaki, which is a huge, huge plus in my book. They run the range all the way from CR 0 up to, I think, CR 30. Towards the back of the book, I love anything that does this, where it gives me creatures sorted by CR. So I can quickly, all right, my guys are level 2 or level 3. I just want to look between CR 0 and CR 3. Which ones am I looking at? Now, I would have loved to have seen some page numbers. As I said, this is a beta. I don't know if the final version that you'll be purchasing off of DM's Guild is going to have, sort of page numbers or whatever. But, I mean, that's, not a big deal. But it's sorted by CR, which is really nice. It's also sorted by terrain. If I want a random encounter and my PCs are going through the forest, here's the monster types I might want to look at. It's sorted by type. I only want constructs. I only want beasts. There it is. Extra bonus stuff. Fun facts, kind of talking through where the origin of some of these things came from. But also you get tokens. Just some extra little bits. I can cut these out very quickly. The 5 foot, the larger ones, set them on my table. Since, of course, you're not going to find miniatures for these things. Exact miniatures at least. I can just print this out, and I've got the, representation of all these different things at different sizes. So there's just a lot of really cool bits here. And I love that they're giving us the perspective of something that's outside of what's normal. I don't know, just reading through it, what the hell the Zorigami can do, what the Tenko can do, what the Namahagi can do. I don't know what any of that can do based on name. I'm sure as you read through the lore, it feels unique. It feels very different. So for that, I believe, you're getting a good amount. Yes, of course, granted, this was given to me, but hopefully there's just enough that I've kind of talked through a little bit that kind of leans you one way or the other, gets you off the fence if you're looking into this. So thank you so much, Nicholas, for sending this to me. Really, really cool stuff. I really love the aesthetics and the artwork, and I'm just intrigued whether I feel like there's a place in my world. And remember, that's another thing too. It doesn't have to be your entire world that feels sort of this culture, but your PCs might venture into a region that screams the aesthetic of this type of stuff, in which case this might be completely usable for you. But even for me, from an inspiration point of view, I want to read through the various abilities here and just change up what my PCs might, or my players especially, might otherwise think a large spider can do. So there it is. There you have it. Like I said, I'll put a link in the description where you can find this. That's all I have for you folks. Thanks everyone for watching, and take care.